Hello guys, welcome back. So in previous lesson, we have finished working toward this clean plate pre-process, as well as took help from this pre-process to create a clean plate, okay? So this was a helper to make our clean plate with details and perfectly even across. Now we have to apply this clean plate. So we are going to use color difference keyer such as IBK. Of course, if you are using key light, so these clean plate process are unnecessary. For soft matte, I normally don't prefer key light because of the grain issue, and applying further grading and matte refine can result into much of detail loss. But in case of IBK, as because we are finished with this clean plate, so that the noise issue will not going to cause major problem, okay? Hence, many artists, including myself, always depend on this clean plate, and once we get perfect clean plate, our job can get nearly half finished, okay? So in the next step, we will move toward matte extraction. So we are finished with this clean plate and we are going to use keying node such as IBK to extract matte. So let's check again. This flow graph here. We have just finished this clean plate pre-process as well as IBK step. And now in this flow graph, so we have divided these keyers into soft matte, core matte and filler matte. In many cases, by only using single keyer won't going to make our job better. So this provided image will not going to help 100%, but let's check if we're going to need distribution such as soft matte, core matte and filler matte. This entire concept is based on the efficient use of part-wise matte distribution. Now let's first extract matte using IBK keying. And now at first, let's view this source plate by directly reading from ID and plate. Now for the first, we will add this IBK gizmo. For that, press tab, type IBK. And here this is IBK gizmo. So here we have finished this clean plate and hence we are going to connect C pipe toward this, okay? Now here we have this foreground and BG, and of course we're not going to use BG to anywhere. For this current composite, there is no necessity to deep dwell inside of it. BG here is provided just to composite. So mainly by covering each of the workflow, we will possibly try to achieve pixel perfect result possible, okay? So at first, the foreground needs to be connected with denoise plate. And now, as we have connected with IBK and the source, so let's view the result. Here we got pre-multiplied output and inside we have this alpha matte. So before, as we used any of keyer such as key light, for example, connecting this pipe to denoise, and now open up the property, enable color picker, and let's sample select the region. So here we have this matte result. Now as we check with IBK keyer, of course the grain level in backing is somewhat even and reduced. So by using only single alpha grading, we can manually adjust all this overall grain into single node. But as we check in this key light, so as because we didn't connected any clean plate, so some of details are not going to get covered at the initial key extraction. So using clean plate and IBK key, we're able to cover much of details. Check that. There have some details section we have retained. So here, comparing with IBK and with key light, so many details are really get covered by using clean plate and IBK keyer. Now concentrate on this IBK to better refine the matte. So by using this one, we are pretty sure that we have certain less transparency inside this matte, okay? And also have some grains over this backing. Let's remove sampler. So this grain needs to remove, but for matte, and as always, if there is serious transparency and possibly in every shot, there is always necessary to distribute the keyer into soft, core as well as filler matte. So in soft matte, we only care about these soft edges, okay? We don't care about any much of transparency inside. Yes, of course, we do have to concentrate some inside edge pixel, so that when there is need to combine soft matte, so that this matte edge can get integrated and blended with core matte in response to edge density. Now let's move adjusting from this IBK gizmo. Now here we have the screen type C-blue. So we have connected C pipe to this clean plate. So this is what we are reading the clean plate information. Now before adjusting this red weight and blue-green weight, let's first enable this luminance match. So click to enable this. And as we can see that, so many of these details are getting retained and it is somehow helping to fill in some of core density inside. In earlier, we have a lot of transparency issue inside, but using luminous match help in much way. Okay. Now, so we are looking through normal skin, but to check better with the transparency inside and if whether any matte holes, so we can better check from here. So there have many issues. Of course, by using only single keyer, won't actually going to correlate with all this matte. Of course, there have core density around this hair section, but we do have some transparency there. So if we are trying to adjust any of it, so this will going to fill up a little bit, but this also going to extra adjust the upper section, which already have much amount of matte density inside. So it will going to dilate a bit, okay? For that, we have to distribute this matte workflow with soft, core, as well as filler matte. So by using soft matte and core matte, if the edges still don't get retained, so using filler and by using key mix, we're going to only isolate certain part of edge, okay? Now coming here, of course, we have seen many transparency inside this matte. So in the soft matte, we don't care about much density, much core white inside this matte. Just a little refinement we have to do. That is to fix certain matte holes and try to adjust a little bit so that the density around this edge will going to get little core white, okay? Inside matte, we don't care. Now let's try with red weight. Here, let's see the effect. So as you can see, we're only trying to adjust the matte section only around the edge so that it will get core white, but do not go over than the sufficient amount. So if the matte edge around is really disturbing a lot, or if the matte is dilating, so in that case, we don't have to use much further adjustment, okay? Of course, there could have some cases where there is no need to adjust any of the values, such as this red weight and green weight. And by keeping default values, we are going to get many of core white edge. But of course, this will not going to completely fill up any matte transparency, but rather we're going to use core matte to fill up those. Now let's concentrate only around this edge section, so it will get little white around to better blend with core matte. So here, as we try to increase the values, we get matte density around. For example, as we adjust up to this range. But now let's see in this already white matte region. So as we try to increase the value, of course, transparency region are filling in, but also this is trying to disturb another matte section, okay? Of course, we can divide the shape into specific, such as one for hair section and another for different part. Hence, we are required to distribute the keyer into soft, core, and filler matte, as well as alpha grading, so the matte can get eroded or dilated based on the matte specific operation. But here, first we are grading on soft to possibly trying to retain matte density without disturbing matte softness, okay? I'm majorly focusing on this most detailed hair section, and I will stop once the hair part will start to disturb. Okay, so at this level, overall matte edge section is filling up. Also, there is no major disturbance on hair part. Here, as we go much extreme, there is sharp line introducing around the hair section. Of course, this is just overall soft matte grade. We will better fine tune using grade and key mix later. Fine, 7 pixel is working well for red weight. Now going toward this green weight. Because we are working on blue backing, so this will consider to be green weight. Here we don't care about inside section, but only around 5 to 10 pixel values. To be very helpful for further matte blending with core matte. So as we go in extreme, see that all this section turning a bit sharper. So in soft matte, we don't have to go much deeper, fixing only around edge, filling up necessary matte hole, and if this is not getting any result, so we will leave it without any further doing, okay? I'm only trying to adjust near edge inside pixel. So at this level, I'm keeping this IBK grading value. Right now, I have no intention to make this matte core white inside. For this soft matte, we possibly try to keep our details and soft matte without much of value adjustment. For example, if you go much higher, many of this edge, matte section is dilating. And we don't want this to happen, okay? Check that. This has given us some sharp line. So I'm happy with the previous and I'm continuing with the result, okay? Many of this inside edge are sufficiently white around. Of course, we have major transparency inside because as we check with this input plate, certainly this cloth section is little blue compared to backing. So getting a perfect matte is not going to be simple at all. In reality, this shot is not for a beginner. In regards with matte, it is okay, but rather for this build, this will surely going to be much harder. For that, the important step we need to prefer to make this composite as real as well as well integrated, okay? So our job is finished for the soft gear. This got us a good result. We don't have to fill up any transparency region, but we're rather mainly interested toward keeping those details and also trying to make this inside edge region around 8 to 10 pixel, little core white inside. So if we're going to blend this soft matte with core matte, so this will going to help in matte blending purpose, okay? So this is all the matte section. Now let's concentrate toward this backing with lots amount of noise over it. And we can refine it by simply adding grade node. For that, press G for grade node. And of course, right here, all we're dealing now is only for this soft matte and not on RGB. So now going for these grade properties. So the first thing that need to be done is to change the channel from RGB to alpha, okay? And now let's move on to the black point. We don't have to adjust any white point, that will going to get very sharper and dilated edge. And because this is soft matte, so we don't touch on white point, okay? Now as we try to increase the black point value, many of the detail section are getting lost, okay? Here we will try to adjust up to very little amount. Maybe at this point is okay. We will also keeping all these possible details. Now let's see. Maybe increase a little bit. Okay, this point. Of course, if there have some noise that are still visible, that are far from the matte, so there we can simply remove them using roto. Now let's check. Okay, up to this point, we will leave it. We can remove the remaining noise from backing using roto and out operation. This is a great way to remove noise without disturbing the foreground matte edge. This is more efficient as compared to grade node. So this is all we have done for soft matte. And now to remove the transparency inside. Check this one. There has a lot of transparency around this section. And for that, we can use another core key to fill this up, okay? Hence, I usually prefer Primatte for core matte setup. The Primatte has many advanced control to handle the matte more efficiently, similar to preprocess setup. let's add backdrop in here. Name it as soft matte. So we have performed the soft matte. Now we're moving toward core matte. For that, for core matte purpose, we will prefer PriMatte node. Of course, we can use Keylight to perform the same. You're welcome to use Keylight if you want, okay? Now let's add PriMatte. So after adding that, our first job is to connect the foreground pipe. So we have BG and foreground. Of course, we're performing all the setup with merge, so we don't require this BG pipe. Instead, we're only connecting this foreground pipe toward this denoise plate. Okay? We're not connecting the keyer pipe toward original input or I plate, which has lots amount of noise over it. Check that before and after applying reduce noise. Okay? Now adding dot node to core matte keyer. Okay, now coming to this PriMatte. So let's press H to fit to screen. So as discussed earlier, here I'm more interested toward selecting this auto compute. Of course, feel free to extract the matte by Ctrl Shift. This is already enabled. We no longer have to switch it on. So let's click on auto compute. So this is pre-multiplied and inside we have this matte. In core matte, we don't care about much of softness around this matte. But we only have to make this matte into perfectly core inside, as well as removing all necessary noise from backing. So we will first start with this clean plate FG noise. This is already set. Now on viewer screen, pressing Ctrl Shift and sample, check this effect. So now matte looks cored inside. But checking with viewer's gamma, of course these are some matte holes. Sure, we can adjust those, but be sure do not refine the matte holes that were affected by a reflective surface. For example, let's undo the matte adjustment. And again, auto compute, going to alpha channel. So while refining the matte transparency, please do adjust the region that has no reflection or highlight. This part is okay to sample. Now, as we can see, there are no matte holes inside. Let's reset this. So our job is finished for this foreground matte. Now move on to remove the backing noise. For that, we have to come in this operation and instead of clean FG to fill in inside matte, now here we need to select clean BG noise. So first increase the viewer's gamma and now Ctrl Shift to remove the backing noise. Okay. So backing is now clean, but we can also see many of the details are lost. Here we don't care about any detail section. All the details are already written in the soft matte. Here we only caring about core density inside. Of course, in the soft matte, there is a lot of transparency inside, and in there we primarily care about making this matte core and white inside. Okay. Now in here, let's check and compare between soft matte and core matte. Of course, this doesn't look much different except inside part, but in many cases, if we are doing certain operation in BG noise as well as FG noise, so this may going to get little dilated with making an edge little sharp, okay? So this is necessary if we are going to combine these two matte together. So by combining, it will going to remove all this transparency, replacing with core matte. But before combining the matte, it is so essential to make this core matte smaller in size, so it will fit well inside soft matte rather than going larger and overlapping the soft matte detail with sharp and dilated matte from core. We must keep safe all soft details around this edge, okay? For this, coming onto this prime matte, and I'm adding erode. Let's add erode node. Here we are having many different erode, but we're going to use this filter erode. Now here, by default, the size is already set to 1. Of course, we don't want too much high value because this size, as comparing it with before and after, it is not larger than the soft matte, okay? So we're not going to erode this much. In here, we're adding values around 0.2 to 0.3. And one important point is that, so we must change the filter. Need to change from box to this Gaussian, okay? Now, as we compare them both, sometimes this core matte setup may comes up with smaller edge artifact around this matte edge section. Of course, overall matte is looking clean, but it can also good way to apply grading just before erode. Feel free to clean up the noise that are located around core matte edge section. Again, we're not going much extreme, but before erode, let's add grade node. And of course, this is matte stream, so I am selecting this to alpha. And here, by checking around this matte section, this is overall looking clean. Check the edge part. So this can be helpful for motion blur or defocus edge. Of course, we have normal edge here. This is not having high level of motion blur or defocus edge. But nonetheless, using the erode will essentially going to create certain edge artifact, okay? Earlier, we already selected box to Gaussian, but this will possibly introduce little amount of blur artifact. And for that case, what we can do is, we can manually remove certain artifact pixel. Some blurry pixel around this edge, okay? Now let's see. So as we increase the black point value, at this point, okay, 0.1, this has removed all necessary noise pixel or artifact around the edge. This is applied to blend soft matte together, okay? So this is the core matte we worked, and after this erode applied, sometimes matte edge can get a little sharper. And for that, I'm going to apply some blur. In this blur, we will need 1 or 2 pixel blur. Very subtle blur we have applied. Just 2 or 3 pixel for edge softening. So this is all we have just worked with. And as we check with this matte, so this core matte need to be smaller in size than the soft matte. Let's check. Specifically toward this hair section. We have the soft matte where all the details are covered, and now looking toward this core matte. Of course, this matte has white density inside, but also details are lost. This is okay because later by combining these two matte together, all the detail will get retained. So here, after finish working with this matte, be sure to add backdrop. Naming this as core matte. So here we get this core matte. Now it's time to combine these two matte together, okay? And as usual, we mainly use merge node with the operation set to max. For that, press M for merge node. In default, this operation is set to over. And we need to change from over to max. Now connecting with these both, so A and this B. Just putting toward this one, let's add dot node. And let's do it through merge. So here, by combining this matte, soft details are well retained. Also, by checking this before and after with soft matte and core matte, so there, please ensure that the core matte remains fit inside soft matte. Looking at this combined result, so here, core matte are very well smaller than soft matte. But now on hair part, there seems some issue. Core matte is overlapping over soft matte. So we need a separate treatment around this hair section. This is because we have used erode node to erode this core matte. But this erode is not well enough, especially for this hair section. And as you check, so before and after we applied erode. But unfortunately, this will also create some edge artifact. So eroding matte will sure works for many of edge section, but not for soft, half opaque with thin wispy detail. Of course, we will treat this hair part separate, and there we will see how to retain this disturbed soft matte detail from soft matte stream, okay? Now let's check through the merge. If the matte combination between soft matte and core matte is good enough. So reducing Weaver's gamma to check the matte blending between them. Here I'm checking with a range of 0.16 to 0.2. So here most inside region is filled by core matte, but seems this region is having some holes. So let's check with the core matte. We can easily deal with this using clean FG noise. So selecting this operation and Ctrl Shift and select. Now this is fixed. Okay, let's compare. So inside matte transparency is now filled in. Now compare soft and combined matte. Of course, similar to earlier, some of the section on hair part. Let's check with original input. This region is not included with foreground character. This is showing the backing screen. Now checking with soft matte. We surely retain that section. But while performing core matte, this didn't erode that section. It can be very difficult to perform erode on such hair and transparency. Since we're applying erode, but the erode value is not well enough for the specific section. That's why it is necessary to distribute this section to perform separate treatment. Sure, we will retain all disturbed section and will make this as pixel perfect possible, okay? So here we have just finished core matte, soft matte workflow. Now check among various edge sections. Looking toward this one, seems like the soft and core matte is not blended well. Of course, this core matte is a little smaller in size, but by combining, this is clearly showing the transparency issue around the edge section. This is mainly because this section has lots amount of blue color, and that's why Kier didn't really able to catch the color difference between foreground and backing, resulted with transparency inside. Because in soft matte, we do little care about making this around edge little white core possible, okay? For blending both matte, needs little density around the edge section. And to deal with it, there is simple step which can help to refine this section. So at this point, we have worked on soft matte, core matte. And then we're going to work on filler matte workflow. So next, let's look at the filler matte keying to well refine the broken edge part. For this, there are many different nodes that we can use. Of course, we can use simple keyer, all-time favorite HSV tool, as well as many different ones. But for this, I'd like to try with key light, and we will find out if this section will able to get filled with core and soft edge around. And if this will, then we will going to isolate our section with combine matte, okay? For this, let's add key light keyer. Also, feel free to use any other keyer such as Primatte or even hue keyer, okay? So here, let's add in key light. Now, our first job is to connect the source pipe toward this IDN plate. View through key light, seeing through RGB channel. Now on this property, going toward the screen color, enabling the color picker, and press Ctrl Shift Alt and sample. Here we get this matte. Now try sampling from this one. No. Here we are only interested toward near section. Now here, they still have some issue. We first need to clear out some noise around this region. For that, going to screen gain and let's adjust. Okay. And then we will try with screen balance to see if this can make any noise refinement. This is no longer affecting. Then going toward this alpha bias. Let's try with red. And here, this is surely helping, but this is introducing much sharper edge. Let's try with green. This is filling up the transparency. Okay. Now with blue. Fine. Sure, there have some holes, matte holes around. Now let's adjust from clip white. So at this level, I think it's fine. Of course, there still has some sharpness around the edge. But no worries, we will refine it later. Even you can use some blur on the sharper edge. But sure, this doesn't get larger in size than the combined matte. And while looking through the normal viewer, please ensure that the matte edge are core and possibly soft around. Here we have some transparency around, so let's try adjusting from alpha bias. Okay, here, this blue has the large impact here. But try mixing the other two remaining channel. Okay, up to this point, we will keep this. And for better refining the edge section, so we can usually add little blur or erode. Let's try with erode, just to blur the edge. Just select Gaussian. Now compare between combine and filler matte. Okay, check the refinement. I find this is okay, because we don't want to isolate all other section. Here, we no longer have to max merge with combine matte, but later we will use K-mix to only isolate the problematic section. Now let's try with blur. Let's check the effect. So earlier, from here, we got sharp matte edge. Now with this blur, let's try adding the blur values. Okay, at this range, it looks okay. Let's remove erode. I'm continuing with blur. Now copying backdrop and paste over to filler matte workflow. And name it as filler matte. let's change its color. Okay, so all we have is this matte we get from this combined soft matte and core matte. And here we also have this filler, which is of course core. But rather we are not going to use it over whole of the section, because we only have to isolate that with disturb section. So here, with using roto, we can now easily replace the disturb section with filler one, with keeping all the other part to get read through combined matte. In the upcoming session, we will see how to isolate the filler with combined matte stream. In this lesson, we learn how to combine soft matte, core matte together. And we also have to isolate filler section with combined matte. So rather than using max merge to combine them both, because if you use the same max operation, this will going to take whole of the matte from filler. And sure, we only want to take some part of it. So there, we will require key mix. So here we got this pipe. We don't have to connect this mask pipe to the combine or filler matte. This mask will going to connect with roto matte to isolate the broken matte section. So let's connect this A and B pipe. And let's first check. So here we are seeing the result, exact similar result. But here we only have to isolate this part. For that, after key mix, press O for roto. Now let's draw around this section. And as we check with this combined matte, so here we have this broken and sharp edge. So let's draw roto shape, selecting Bezier. Covering this artifact edge. Select all and press Z to soften. You can also use feather handle to do the same. Okay, so this is all finished. Of course, we are not going to animate because we are working on single plate. And now, so the last step is to connect the mask pipe with roto shape. And let's view through key mix. Of course, we are not seeing any change around matte section because the connection that we have used in this key mix needs to change. So we have to change this B to A. For that, select key mix and press Shift X, and now let's check. This was before and this is after. Here we only isolated this part from the filler matte. Better see it now. So before and now after. Maybe add a little more erode values. Around 2 pixels. Okay, this is working fine. Also, increase the feather from roto shape. Alright. The adjustment looks fine. We are good at this stage. So we have just finished this matte combination and we are happy with this distribution. But now our issue is that the hair section is not well retained. Because as we check that one, so this is soft matte section, and as we check with combined matte, so some of the section, for example, this matte part seems a little dilated. This is because even if we use the core matte with using erode to erode that matte, so this erode worked better for various section, but it didn't work enough on this thin hair section because of this high transparency region around this matte. Due to this, we get artifact and blurriness around this matte. Hence, in the next lesson, we will work on to written this specific section from soft math stream.